Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. I'm Pinky Webb. Today on the program, the Defense Department reveals militarization in the South China Sea continues as Beijing seems relentless in building artificial islands in the disputed waters. Three former top government officials are now urging the Duterte administration to bring the arbitral award to the United Nations, but the Foreign Affairs Department rejects the proposal. And the Justice Department finishes the first draft of the implementing rules for the anti-terrorism law. Will this pass legal scrutiny? Retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio joins us live. Defense Secretary Delphine Lorenzana confirms that China continues to develop its artificial islands in the disputed South China Sea. At a House budget hearing on Tuesday, Lorenzana also revealed that Chinese troops are always present in Fiery Cross, Mischief, and Subi Reefs. This comes after two retired Supreme Court justices and a former Foreign Affairs Secretary urged the Duterte administration to bring the arbitral ruling to the United Nations. Let's go straight to the source of the story. We have retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice Carpio, welcome to the source and thank you for your time.
Good morning, Pinky. Thank you for inviting me to the source. And good morning to our viewers.
According to Secretary Delphine Lorenzana, Justice Carpio, China continues its improvement on Fiery, Mischief Reef, and Subi Reef. Just a little background on this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Mischief is within the Philippines exclusive economic zone. Fiery Cross is a high tide elevation that cannot sustain economic life, hence entitled only to a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles. And then, of course, you have warned about Subi Reef also in the past because it's part of the continental shelf of the Philippines, very near, of course, to Pag-asa Island. But I do remember you once said that China spent billions on these structures and that we cannot just expect China to just abandon these reclamations. Does that mean that this is a lost cause for the country?
Not exactly, Pinky, because yes, China spent billions of dollars for every artificial island. But, and of course, there's no power on earth that can force China to abandon those three huge air and naval bases. But nature will help us because it's projected that sea level rise by the end of the century will probably submerge all of those artificial islands again. And so we continue to oppose those artificial islands because the Mischief Reef is within our EEZ, and Subi Reef is within our territorial sea of Pag-asa, and Fiery Cross Reef is a high tide rock, which we claim as part of Philippine territory under the Alayan Island Group. We continue to assert our sovereignty and sovereign rights over these areas, but I think nature will help us here because it's projected that by the end of the century, those features will be submerged by sea level rise. Thank you.
Doesn't China know that, Justice? And what happens to all the billions spent in
they probably
building
think that
these
they
structures?
can overcome. They always believe that they can turn back nature, but it's very expensive to maintain those artificial islands, considering that the sea level rise will continue for the next 200-300 years.
Any among the three It's called the Big Three, Justice. Any among the three which is most important or more significant to the Philippines?
Well, Mischief Reef is the one that really affects us because it's near the Philippines, the closest to the Philippines. And Mischief Reef is the gateway to Reed Bank. Reed Bank is where the gas is located. That's larger than the Malampaya
Mhm.
gas field. And that's the source of our next gas supply once Malampaya runs out of gas. And with China in Mischief Reef, they will be a few hours away from Reed Bank. If we drill in the Reed Bank, they will be there right away to stop us. So that air and naval base in Mischief Reef is a dagger pointed at our gas supply.
When you say that nature will eventually intervene because of the sea elevation and basically, in very simple terms, justice wipe out rather these structures, where or in the short term, where is China taking this? How how is this going to affect us in the short term? And when I say short term, I would say in the next few years to a decade.
Well, right now, every time we send a survey ship to Reed Bank to explore for gas or to confirm the gas field, uh, they are right there beside us right away because they're very near. They're in Mischief Reef. Before, it took them days to travel from
Mhm.
Hainan to Reed Bank. Now it takes them a few hours to go to Reed Bank. So the the Mischief Reef is very vital for China to prevent the Philippines from extracting the gas in Reed Bank.
I see. You know, Secretary Lorenzana was saying that we actually really have no capability to know what China is really doing in the big three. I wanted to ask you, are we really that incapable of knowing what is actually happening or what the plan is, what the grand plan is?
Well, I think we can deduce from satellite photos what they are doing. They have a military grade runway, so we know that fighter jets and bomber planes will be landing there. We see hangars there, so we know that they will station fighter jets there if the need arises. We see barracks for thousands of Marines, so they have troops there ready to move out anytime. We see radar domes, so they monitor all flights that land and take off in Palawan. So from the satellite
Mhm.
images, we know what kind of facilities they have, and from that we can deduce the intention. The intention is to enforce the nine dash line as China's national boundary to prevent us from exploiting the gas in Wheatbank.
And what is your reaction knowing that the improvement in the big three continues despite the pandemic?
It just shows that China has a plan, and regardless of whether we kowtow to China, we become friendly to China, China will proceed with its plan. And and it has been doing that for the last 10 years. No matter what we do, they continue with their island building, fortification of their air and naval bases in the Spratlys. So we can project what we know what they want to do. They want to control the resources in the South China Sea, the
Mhm.
fish, oil, and gas and mineral resources, and they want to declare the South China Sea, the area within their nine dash line, as their national territory. Uh, that's very clear.
Mhm. And because of this, Justice Carpio, you, together with the former Secretary Albert Del Rosario, and former Associate Justice Conchita Carpio Morales, are urging the government to bring the, or raise rather, the arbitral ruling to the United Nations. Would this be during the General Assembly? I believe it's happening this September 15.
Uh, yes, we want the issue to be brought to the UN General Assembly because if we bring it to the Security Council, China has a veto there, and China will obviously veto any proposed resolution that our friends may submit on our behalf. So we bring it to the UN General Assembly, which is the forum of world opinion, and we ask the civilized community of countries in the world to help us enforce the ruling, to tell China that China must abide with international law, that China cannot just seize the exclusive economic zones of other coastal states. The Philippines is not the only country involved here. You have Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. And if China can seize the exclusive economic zones of 5 coastal states in the South China Sea, that will mean that UNCLOS will collapse. UNCLOS will no longer serve as the constitution for the oceans and seas of our planet. And all other coastal states, the small coastal states, will be at the mercy of their bigger neighbors who will just seize their exclusive economic zones. So coastal states have an interest here. When Nicaragua sued the US and won in the
Right.
ICJ and the US refused to comply with the ruling, Nicaragua brought the issue to the UN General Assembly. And at the end of the day, only one country supported the US, Israel. The US, the greatest economic and military power in the world, was totally isolated and totally humiliated before the international community. And that forced the US to strike a compromise with Nicaragua. Here, we are not alone because we have 4 other ASEAN countries that are prejudiced by the nine dash line, and all other states are afraid that once UNCLOS collapses, there's no more rule of law in the oceans and seas of our planet. It will be might is right. Everybody will try to acquire warships, missiles, just to protect their maritime zones. And funds needed for education, social services will be diverted to buy war machines. And it will be a terrible place to live in. The world will be a terrible place to live in. And the coastal states know this. That's why we expect an overwhelming majority of coastal states to support us, because by supporting us, they will be preserving the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which protects them.
We need to take a very short break. Still, a lot of questions to ask about this. I wanted to ask if this is raised, is this going to merit? Is there going to be a mandatory vote on members of the UN rather General Assembly? What is the process? We'll talk about that after the break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, former, rather retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice, help us understand the process. Indeed, if this is raised before the UN General Assembly, what will happen? Will there be a vote? And if so, are you confident that we will get the numbers on this?
Yes, the resolution that we will sponsor will state that uh, China must comply with the arbitral ruling, must comply with international law, must follow UNCLOS. And that will be put to a vote. Of course, before it's put to a vote, we will have to campaign. We will have to ask our 4 other ASEAN countries who are prejudiced by the nine dash line to help us convince other states. And you have the United States, France, UK, Australia, Japan. They have been conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, and they have stated that the arbitral ruling must be complied with. We expect them to support us. The EU also came out with a statement that the arbitral ruling must be respected by the parties. and the G7 also, and of course India came out with a similar statement. Uh, we expect a lot of support, and I think at the very least we will have a majority on our side. Uh, the of course uh, the decision of the General Assembly in our favor uh, has no legal binding effect because the binding effect is the ruling of the arbitral tribunal. That is legally binding on China. But the UN resolution is an expression of opinion of the countries who are members of the United Nations. It's their moral support for the arbitral ruling. It's
Mhm.
the expression of opinion of the people of the world that they want China to comply with the ruling. And that is very important because China is a nuclear power. Nobody can tell China to comply with the threaten China to comply because China can retaliate. It is a nuclear armed state. So China, there are only two things, two ways that China will comply. China voluntarily complying, which we do not see happening, and China is forced by world opinion to comply. China needs the world because China has to export to survive, it has to import to survive, and China wants to show the world
Mhm.
that is a model in terms of economic development for a state. And China wants to lead also in the Asia Pacific. But if China
Yeah.
will just seize the exclusive economic zones of its neighbors, nobody will respect China. Everybody will be fearful of China. China will not command the respect of its neighbors. So it's very important
But
to China
while
to be seen
Justice,
as complying with international law. That's why China always said, we will comply with international law. But
right.
in actuality, they refuse to comply.
But here's where I'm confused. During our interview with the Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin, he said he's not keen on really bringing this up before the UN General Assembly because he said we will lose and he will never want that to happen. We will lose and he does not want that to happen under his watch.
Well, I do not agree that we will lose because I think before we actually submit it to a votation, we will have to do a lot of work. We will have to campaign and count the votes.
Mhm.
This is not just this will not happen because we just filed it. We have to do a lot of work here. We have to, but from the pronouncements of other states, the EU, the G7, Japan, Australia, India, and our
Mhm.
neighbors. They want China to comply with international law. And this is now international law. We are now asking them, okay, you've been saying that China, the parties to the arbitration must comply with the arbitral ruling. Here is the resolution. We ask China to
Yeah.
comply. Do you vote or not with us? So it's actually asking them to affirm what they've been saying.
But do you think that they're just waiting for the Philippines to bring this up before the UN General Assembly?
Yes, because that is the route. When Nicaragua won before the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and
Yeah.
the US refused, Nicaragua went to the General Assembly. Because you cannot just stop now. This is not, when we never expected that once we win the arbitral ruling, China will just roll over and comply. China will do its best not to comply. So we have to push the envelope and rally all the other countries of the world that we are on the
Mm-mm.
side of the law, and this is also for their own national interest. They have a stake in making China comply because they will also suffer. I'll give you an example.
All right.
In the EU, the EU issued a statement after the ruling came out that the parties must comply with UNCLOS, with international law. But in the deliberations of the EU, uh, Greece watered down the resolution. EU could have issued a stronger resolution, but it was watered down because Greece was trying to court China to invest in the port of Piraeus. Greece was inviting China to invest in Greece, and so of course they operate by consensus also in
Mhm.
the EU. But now Greece is facing Turkey, which is seizing its exclusive economic zones in the Aegean Sea. And Greece is the one now saying Turkey must follow international law, must comply with UNCLOS. So this is a lesson to other states. If you do not assert now UNCLOS, you
Okay.
might be the victim the next time around. But even if
In the future.
Greece
Very quickly, Justice.
did not
Yeah.
help us totally, we will still support Greece because Greece is invoking UNCLOS, and we have no recourse but to support countries that invoke UNCLOS.
And very quickly, because I need to go on another break, Justice, if we don't raise this before the UN General Assembly, what is another option?
Well, the other option is, as I've mentioned before, we should welcome the freedom of navigation operations of the US, UK, France, Japan, and India, because when they conduct these
Can.
naval drills, they are saying that they can do this because in the West Philippine Sea, there is an exclusive economic zone of the adjacent coastal state, and there's only one adjacent coastal state, that's the Philippines. So they're in fact enforcing the ruling for us. So we should welcome that, and we have not welcomed the
Yeah.
freedom of navigation
Okay.
operations of this country. We should welcome, and we should tell China, if you still encroach on our EEZ, we will join the freedom of navigation operations of these countries, and we will ask our
Right.
neighbors,
Okay.
Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, to also join us. So but these are peaceful means to enforce the ruling because the exercise of freedom of navigation is guaranteed under UNCLOS. That's a right. And if you are
The UNCLOS,
exercising
yes.
a right,
All right.
you are exercising something lawfully and peacefully.
All right. Justice, we need to go on another short break. We'll be right back. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Justice, three topics I need to discuss, but we only have 3 minutes left. Here goes. The blacklisting of Chinese companies involved in the reclamation of militarization of the South China Sea. The U.S. imposes sanctions on them. Secretary Locsin earlier said he would recommend the same, but the president said no, these projects will continue, and then the Secretary Locsin did agree at some point. What do you think is the effect of the president's decision to continue on with these companies, Chinese companies in the Philippines that have ties or are connected to the reclamation in the South China Sea?
Well, by allowing these Chinese construction companies, these are the companies that dredged those reefs, atoll reefs in the Spratlys. They created those artificial islands. Those dredging activities constituted crimes against humanity because they destroyed atoll reefs, uh, which are the breeding ground of fish, and hundreds of millions of people living around the South China Sea depend on fish for their protein. That's a destruction of the marine environment. That's a crime against humanity. It's also contrary to our fisheries law because anyone who destroys uh, atoll reefs or coral reefs violate
Mm.
our own fisheries law. So here is a Chinese company that violated international law, violated domestic law of the Philippines, and we allow them now to give them a government contract, a juicy government contract to reclaim in uh, uh, in Manila Bay. The message there is China can
Okay.
continue sieging, continue encroaching on our exclusive economic zone, destroying our coral reefs, and it will be business as usual for the same Chinese companies that destroy these atoll reefs. It's a very bad message because
Senator
it
Ralph Recto.
aids and abets China.
Right.
It's aiding and abetting China in encroaching on our exclusive economic zone.
In fact, Senator Ralph Recto filed a resolution on this, but I need to jump to another topic. Dito tele community, do you see any problem, Justice, with the permit given to Dito to build cell sites in military camps where, according to Secretary Lorenzana, Globe and Smart have cell sites anyway as well?
Yes, Pinky, I think it's very dumb of us to allow those towers to be installed inside military camps because we know that even if you turn off your smartphone, if somebody has injected a spy up there, they can listen to your conversation. Your iPhone can take pictures even without your knowing it because they can take command of your smartphone through a spy app. And even if you turn off your iPhone, it will still record whatever you can say. And you just imagine putting a tower inside the military camp, and the equipment, all those chips on this tower are made in China. They can just put in Spire firmware. The software comes from China. They can put backdoors. You ask any security analyst who is familiar with cybersecurity, and they will tell you absolutely do not allow towers to be installed in your military camps because it's like allowing China to put a listening device in your conference room used by your commanders. I think
All
it's a
right.
no-brainer. We should
And
not
the
allow it.
issue on Sabah, just very quickly, Justice, I hope you don't mind. Um, the focus here, should this issue temporarily be shelved for now to focus more and becoming more of allies because of what is happening in the South China Sea?
Well, the Sabah issue has nothing to do with the South China Sea dispute, and we should not combine the two because if we combine the two, that is exactly what China wants. These are two separate issues, and let's keep them separate. If we want to bring up the Sabah issue, do not bring in the South China Sea dispute because you are just falling into the trap of China. That's my point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. Good to see you again, sir, and take care.
Thank you, Pinky. Thank you for inviting me to
And
your
thank you.
source. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines.